Well, hello and welcome to the Small Scape. Today starts the day that we are going to start scaping some small tanks for these cubbies behind me. There's actually two sets of cubbies, one here and one on the other set of our ginormous dresser that's holding, well, 4 tanks itself. So I'm going to actually warn you, this month and next month, I'm going to be doing a lot, I'm going to actually say a lot, of small scapes. So if that's not something you're into, well, then the channel, The Small Scapes, is probably not the spot for you. Yes, so I'm very excited. Today, this feeling for this tank, the inspiration for this tank, is actually a number of comments that I get on nearly every single video. And it's a lot of people who are afraid to scape. They don't think they're good enough. They don't know how to plant plants. They're afraid to do a planted tank. All that, I'm going to be doing a very simple scape. Why? Because it's a tank that really needs to get set up, because we do want it for the studio to have additional little tank set up. And I have a number of little plants that I want to put in a small tank that I can see and appreciate, and a really nice piece of driftwood that I want to use. So sometimes, you know, the idea is not to create the most beautiful scape of all time. Don't set your standards up that high. Sometimes you just have some little critters. Maybe you got some new shrimp or some fish and you just have to set up a tank. That's what this is. I'm going to keep it really nice and simple, and then we'll go from there. Maybe I'll look at it after a while and want to add something. We'll see. I don't know. But let's get started. Let's meet our tank for today. Yes, it looks almost identical to the ones behind it, but it is smaller. This is a 2.65 gallon from Lifegard Aquatics. A big thank you once again to Lifegard for sending these out. I really love these elevated designs, and just the sizes are great. It's very close to a cube. This one I believe is 8 by 8 by 10. If I'm mistaken, I'll correct those dimensions up on the screen, but really love it, and especially the mechanics are all hidden in the back. Yes, I couldn't resist using my favorite sand, black top fin sand from PetSmart, but there will be some other substrates coming up. I'm warning you right now. And I kept it to a single piece of driftwood, actually with a smaller piece in the back. Now that I've placed my driftwood, I like to find some rocks. This one I think I'm going to use. This one is one of the ones that I got at Aquashella in the bucket of rocks that was gifted to me. And I have one at home here that's very similar. It's a very similar granite, so I think I'm going to try and use these two. And then I also like to use very small rocks, little pebbles, and I get these little containers at the Dollar Tree. They're really handy, especially for holding little varieties of rocks that I can dig through, because I always like to add a little something. It's kind of like a little surprise. Something, a very unique little rock or something. It's the rock collector in me maybe. And it just makes a small little scape like this way more interesting. This guy here, I keep a lot of my smaller gravel and pebbles and very tiny little spider woods. So we'll see if any of these look kind of cool in there. Now when I place rocks, I really like to find little nooks and crannies of the driftwood and kind of fit them in there like they've been growing around each other for some time. It's not really rocket science, and then it'll frequently change during the scape too. So now it's time to have some fun and dig through here. Maybe pull out a few pieces. Maybe I'll use them, maybe I won't. Like I said, I'm really just trying to keep this simple, kind of stress-free, not trying to make a magical looking scape, just something that is pleasant to look at and relatively simple. These little guys are pretty cute. Maybe I'll be able to use them. Like I said, we'll see. Now these little containers from the Dollar Tree, just love them to hold all my little rocks, and I try to keep like by like, so different ones that are maybe rough edges, some of them by color, some of them if they're smoother, whatever. Just dig through them and see what grabs your fancy, and see which ones are maybe similar to the larger rocks that I've used, or maybe completely opposite, so it really kind of catches your eye. These little smaller, like I wouldn't say gravel, but smaller little accent rocks, I usually use them to kind of draw your eye to a very interesting part of the scape. Maybe something very interesting in the driftwood, maybe like a little you know, like a little nook or cranny, something that makes it look really fun, and just, like I said, to kind of draw your eye to a specific place. Kind of like if you were small and you were living in that scape, where I would want you to go and sit down. Now the way that I like to use these little tiny pieces of spider wood are to make it look kind of like it's growing around the other hardscaping, so the larger rocks or the driftwood. So I try to match up the kind of curves of those other pieces and just have them so they look like they've been growing around these for some time. Not really rocket science, it's just kind of what looks good, and kind of it can also determine like the flow of your eye throughout the tank too. Just because they're lighter colored typically than the hardscaping that I use, but it's just kind of fun to play around. I just try to not take a whole lot of time because you could really spend a lot of time doing this, and we don't want this to be stressful. Now the third piece of spider wood just wasn't cooperating, so I eventually didn't use it. And then just placing some little accent rocks, I threw them in. Wasn't sure if I wanted to keep them or not, but sometimes I'll just chuck them in there and see if I want them to stay or move them out later. And then I did use some super glue to hold them in place, but the trick is leave them in there for a while, maybe an hour or two, so it actually adheres. And then sometimes I will, if I'm thinking about it, throw some sand over it to cover up the super glue. But invariably I will find out, I will probably find later some globs of white super glue. Now here is the Buse. This is Godzilla. Very excited to use it. And in each, I got 2 plants, and in each plant there were 3 little plants in there. So kind of a nice size little haul with those. And like I said, I was just using these, and then 2 tiny little, what I call micro Nubius, but it's the Nubius Nano Petite, and just super tiny. Now the trick here is to be able to glue those the rhizome and the roots in the back of the hardscaping, so you really can't see it. But with this minimal hardscaping, I'll be able to see it a little bit, except for the fact that this is going into a cubby, so I will only be viewing it from the front panel, which is good. The other thing is this piece of driftwood is so cool, and it's got really got little holes in it and little cutouts that I don't want to block that. So the plants are actually, I'm using them to not detract from the piece of driftwood. It does take some patience to super glue your plants, but just have patience with it, and you want to, if at all possible, I like to use what's called a mechanical hold, and basically utilizing the flow of the driftwood or the rocks, or even like a little nook or a little cranny that you can kind of wedge the root, the roots or the rhizome into, so that the actual hardscaping is holding on to the plant for you. So then as the glue dries, you're not actually holding it there, and that will reduce the chances of you super gluing your fingers to any of your hardscaping as well. I did decide to use a rock that I wasn't planning on, just because that root mass was so large, and there was really nowhere for it to kind of lay on and attach after a while. So the rock's going to help me out, and it looked kind of cool. I really like that rock because it's in the shape of a heart. Now this little micro Nubius was it's a little difficult to attach because it is so tiny. I really like to use these when I'm setting up the scape outside of the scape, and since the scape was already done and I was walking through it, I didn't want to pull pieces out, but I did eventually decide to pull out a little accent rock and glue the piece outside of the tank, which is way easier. But I did use my new little tweezers that came in kind of handy. And remember, if you knock off a leaf from a Nubius, don't panic, because it'll just tell the plant, hey, grow another leaf. Another thing when you're aquascaping, especially if you're going to be doing it dry, you want to keep a mister handy, because these plants will want to dry out a little bit. And here it is. It's very simple. Is it lush? No, there's only going to be a few little inhabitants in here. I wanted it very simple, but I'm very curious to see how fast it grows in, what it looks like over time, and I really kind of like how it turned out. Like I said, very simple and very few pieces. Now for the inhabitants, just 2 little blue dream shrimp and a couple of little pond snails. That's it. I may add some more shrimp when I can find them. I'm looking for them out of my one tank that I'm clearing out. I'm changing the inhabitants, which will be pretty fun. But this is a very small tank, so you really don't have too many options other than, you know, just a few little shrimp or maybe a snail or two. If you are looking for shrimp, definitely check out one of our channel sponsors, Flip Aquatics, who has the best selection of shrimp, different colors, shapes, sizes, and all that good stuff. You can't go wrong. Now I did add Fritzzyme 7 to help kickstart the cycle. It adds live nitrifying bacteria. Fritz Aquatics is a channel sponsor of Primetime Aquatics. Well, this will be a fun tank to watch it grow in a little bit, see how the buse, how fast that grows. It's not a fast grower by any means. It's similar to the Anubias. They're both low light, so they don't require a whole lot of light. But in the cubbies, there won't be a whole lot of light, but it will be interesting once I start setting up some more tanks, how these cubbies behind me in the studio will look filled up with tiny little tanks. It'll be super fun to watch. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and enjoyed this coming together, and maybe it gives you some encouragement if you are one of those people who's afraid of scaping or adding plants, setting up your first planted tank maybe. But you can always keep it simple, and it should definitely be fun and stress-free. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I will see you later.